Hello, BookTube. I went out very early this morning and had a bunch of unpleasant errands to do, and when they were all done, I was right by the Brattle Bookshop in downtown Boston. A great used bookstore. Those of you who've been watching this channel have heard me talk about it for years. It's got a really active turnover and reasonable prices, and also a sale lot next door with thousands more books that are priced at $1, $3, and $5. And the sale lot isn't organized in any way except by price. So you can't go there, wondering where the poetry books are or where the biographies are. If you have the time, if you're lucky enough to have the freedom, you really have to look at every book. And I did that. I've been doing that for a very, very long time. And I found a bunch of books. I'm sure that the Brattle sale lot has not had a great infusion of books in the short while since I was last there, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You're going to miss things. No matter how thorough you are, you're going to miss things when you're going book by book along those cards. And also your interests change. And books that are maybe in a little less than optimal condition. That is not the case. Usually the books outside in the Brattle lot are not junk. But sometimes your eye will just pass over something that looks a little bit faded or battered. That's happened to me a few times. Then you look at it again and realize not only is this salvageable, but it's something I want. But one way or another, I found a bunch of books, and I want to show them to you before I run out of steam. The first one is the only mass market paperback that I got. I've never seen it before. It's this thing. It's edited by George Steiner, who we've seen before on this channel. It's the Penguin Book of Modern Verse Translation, but don't let the title fool you. The modern refers to the translators, not to the things translated. This is mostly classical literature, translated by all kinds of poets and scholars. My beloved Catullus and Horace are hugely represented in here. Oftentimes, just thumbing through it, oftentimes by poets or in ways that I have not seen before. So this is going to be fantastic for me. You've got names like Thomas Hardy, Marianne Moore, T.S. Eliot, Arthur Waley, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Auden, Spencer, Robert Lowell, Richard Wilbur, a whole bunch of people doing a whole bunch of different classical and canonical authors. So I'm all for it. I'm a little bit uncertain here of the filming. I'm trying a whole bunch of different things here. So this whole week has been either being a no-show on BookTube or trying experimental means of getting videos up. You have to bear with me until I hammer out the perfect solution. This next one is it's a trade paperback. It's sun faded. It's Edward Hogan, great American essayist, Edward Hogan. This is Heart's Desire. It's just an anthology of his essays. He's just an old style E.B. White style personal essayist. He doesn't really write essays on any one subject. They're just sort of formal personal essays of the type that I always think about and somewhat wryly smile about when somebody writes out first drafts of stand-up comedy routines on their computer, prints it out, gets a publisher to print it, and calls it essays. When I see a book like that, and we've seen plenty of them on this channel, I get them all the time. The reason I wince when I see that word is because of people like Edward Hogan and E.B. White, for that matter. Because they're writing formal essays that have a lot of thought, a lot of construction, and that aren't just built around, gee, don't men suck, punchline. I love Edward Hogan, but when I saw this, I immediately realized that I don't have any. Usually when I get a collection of his one way or another, I give it away, so I'm very happy to have this, even though it's a little bit washed out by the sun. And if it's a little bit washed out by the sun, this next one, somebody, this is almost lost completely. Not the book. The book itself is fine. It's a trade paperback of a book that I've had many times before. This is Kipling, Auden and Company by the great Randall Jarrow. But as you can see, there's nothing left on the spine at all. So I'm not going to know when I put this on the bookcase for books about books and collected reviews and essays and whatnot. I'm not going to know what this is unless I remember it. This is basically a placeholder book until I can find a hardcover with a dust jacket of this, or at the very least a trade paperback with that isn't sun washed. But I'd like a hardcover with a dust jacket. I'd like actually hardcovers with dust jackets of all of Randall Jarrow's collected essays and reviews, because he is great. He wrote a towering classic of my own profession, Poetry and the Age. and he was one of the greatest poetry critics of all time. And that's what this is. This is a huge collection of small, occasional prose about poetry. There's a lot about, there's some about prose as well in here, but it's mostly poetry. He's a joy to read on poetry, even if you don't like the poets that he's writing about. That's often the case with me. I could take or leave the poetry of William Carlos Williams, for instance, and a whole bunch of other people. But he's unfailingly fascinating on all of them. And there's quite a bit in here, as the title implies. There's quite a bit in here on Auden, who I've been working my way through very slowly, very ruminatively. I've been working my way through the big collected poems of Auden and really enjoying it. Really, really getting something out of that volume. And there's no one I'd rather read about Auden than Randall Jarrow. Well, there's quite a bit in here on William Butler Yeats as well, and he's great on that as well. He's also really perceptive on in his day, the much more modern poets that have since become sort of quasi-canonical in their own right. I love the way he writes. Absolutely love it. I saw this thing and realized that the only thing I have by him is a really pretty edition of Poetry in the Age, and nothing else. So. Then this next one is a big fat biography. You can hardly go to the Brattle without getting a big fat biography. This is a trade paperback, but that's all right because I'm not 100% sure of it. I read it when it first came out and remembered sort of admiring it more than liking it. I love the biographer in question here. The biographer in question here is Jean Edward Smith, and I have a number of biographies by this person and really like them, but this is the big biography of FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Big, huge thing. In a trade paperback. Ordinarily, I might not jump for that. I might wait for a hardcover, but I have... it's weird. I'm not defending it in any way. I have a weird aversion to biographies of FDR, and was a bit of a weakness today because, boy oh boy, it's never a good idea to go to the Brattle sale lot looking for things. It's never a good idea to impose your will on the sale lot, but there is a copy of every FDR book ever written there. The Brattle must have bought a huge collection from somebody. Every diplomatic decision, every period of his life, collected letters between him and every world leader, every private person, every scandal, the last 100 days, the middle 100 days, the first 100 days, FDR and the bomb, FDR in Japan, FDR in Bretton Woods, a million different things. A big book on the New Deal and dozens and dozens of other things. I was looking at them all and feeling a little guilty because although I think the Second World War is the greatest single historical subject in human history, I don't have much of a predilection for reading huge biographies of Stalin, for instance, although I'm committed. I'm committed to doing that with Kotkin's ongoing ordeal, his ongoing Gulag archipelago of 1,200-page biographies of Stalin until we finally get to the end and nail the coffin shut. And I've made my opinions of Churchill very well known on this channel. The hagiography that attends him mystifies me. And the same thing is largely true for FDR as well, who was an oily, duplicitous, lifetime career politician of a type that in any other setting but World War II, I don't know that we'd be talking about him the same way. And it infuses his biographies, just infuses them. I seem to remember that it didn't really infuse this one all that bad. But when I saw this, I realized, well, you could definitely give it a reread because you love the author. And because of this weird aversion, I don't have any biographies, one-volume, standalone, soup-to-nuts biographies of FDR at all. This is the only one I now have. I have Nigel Hamilton's 3-volume work on FDR as Supreme Commander of World War II for the Allies. And that trilogy gets more fascinating as it goes along. When I saw that announced, I thought, well, God, this ground has been covered so many times. What's his name? Larrabee did a really good volume called Commander-in-Chief. But Hamilton makes the point at the beginning of his first book rather strongly that it's never been studied in the way that it should be. It's never been studied for the historical anomaly that it is. And I love that trilogy. Absolutely love it. And I've often thought, do we really need to know much more about FDR than what he did to win World War II? This is the whole thing. This will be before he was stricken with polio. This will be all of the affairs. This will be all of his behaviors, long before World War II, when he was a New York dandy and whatnot. And I view it as a blind spot. I recognize it as a blind spot. I've lost count of how many people. Bean, what are you doing? What are you licking? Stop licking, baby. She gets into this thing. I had people warn me that Basset Hounds did it, and I definitely saw that my Basset Hound Lucy did it. This kind of a Zen thing where they'll start licking a paw and then just mentally check out. And if you're not paying attention, then you'll look at them an hour later and they will have been licking that same paw just completely mindlessly for a solid hour. And you just have to stop them from doing it. You just have to, it's just some weird compulsion. You just have to stop them from doing it. And that's definitely true for Frieda. That's definitely true. Sometimes when she's sound asleep, 2 a.m, she'll start just rhythmically licking one of her paws. And I've learned the subtle technique of inserting a hand that is firm enough to stop her from doing that, but not so firm that it wakes her up. but she'll do it when she's awake as well. Won't you, babe? Huh? Won't you? Oh, you baby. How you doing? Oh, you're so pretty. You are. You're so pretty. She's sticking really close, so I thought I'd set up the camera so that she didn't have to be far away. But anyway, my point being that I'm not sure that there's anything about FDR that I don't already know, but it feels a little odd to have a bookcase just across the way from me here that is absolutely crammed with presidential biographies. In fact, one whole bookcase is crammed with presidential biographies. And now that I'm looking at it across the room here, I'm realizing to my dismay that there is no room. Those biographies fit exactly. So I'm going to have to rearrange things in order to fit this. But I'll read it first. I'll worry about it once it's done. Then we have next up some hardcovers. The first one is science fiction. This is Anne McCaffrey. I have an ebook of this, but I wanted a hardcover because the hardcover is so pretty. And this is Dragon's Dawn by Anne McCaffrey, the great Michael Whelan cover there. This is, I forget which number it is in the Dragon Riders of Pern series. The Dragon Riders of Pern series started off with a short story that then became a novel called Dragonflight, about a planet called Pern, which is Earth-like. It's in the Rookback sector. It was colonized by humans long, long time ago. And once they were committed to the colonization, they suddenly realized that there was something about the planet that initial survey teams had not really noticed, which is that when the planet Pern comes close enough in its orbit to a sister planet, the inhabitants of that sister planet, a voracious kind of spore, can actually make the jump between planets and rain down on the surface of Pern, and they destroy anything organic that they touch. The natives started to call them Thread, and Threadfall started to become an existential threat to Pern. When Dragonflight starts, a whole society, a quasi-feudal society, has long since grown up. The inhabitants of Pern don't remember an interplanetary expedition. They have no idea that they're living on a planet, so to speak. And they have evolved local little lizards, little flying dragon-like creatures, dragonettes, into enormous city bus-sized dragons that can blast Thread out of the air, and that form, therefore, the groundlings, the citizens' first line of defense, only line of defense against Threadfall. And Dragonflight was popular with fans and got a few reprints, and a very pretty mass market paperback reprint, again with a Michael Whelan cover, that gave rise to Dragon Quest, the second book in what was to become the original Pern trilogy, and then White Dragon, the third book in what was to become the original Pern trilogy. But then, after a while, the Pern books just kept coming. After a while, I mean, Anne McCaffrey finishes a story, very carefully finishes a story at the end of Dragonflight. And then she finishes a larger story at the end of White Dragon to finish the trilogy. So the trilogy is satisfying on its own. But there were more stories to tell in Pern, both in the so-called present day of the events of the Dragon Riders of Pern, but also in the long history of Pern. Hence, we get the fourth novel was Moreta, Dragon Lady of Pern, which took place backwards in time from the events of Dragonflight, and dealt rather alarmingly today. I imagine it'd be pretty alarming to read Moreta today, because it's about the planet being gripped by a pandemic, a devastating pandemic that turns out, you can tell right away early on in the book that what the inhabitants of Pern are dealing with without realizing it is influenza. But that still left lots of other things to tell, lots of other stories. And the biggest one of those untold stories, was this book. The expedition arriving at Pern and realizing that there's local life that the expedition could not possibly have known about, studying that life, and then experiencing Threadfall and wondering if this is the end of everything. And I love this book. I love Moreta, Dragon Lady of Pern. There's another standalone Pern novel called The Girl Who Talked to Dragons that I think is also really good. They're not all really good. Those post-trilogy Pern books went on. There were a dozen of them, and they're not all good by a long shot. Some of them that have the bones of being good, All the Weirs of Pern should have been really good, are not. But Dragon's Dawn really does work as a novel. It really is good. Many fans at the time that it came out and ever since, and I myself have said, probably don't read this if you're not familiar with the Dragon Riders of Pern. If you haven't read that original trilogy, or at least Dragonflight, then this probably won't do much for you. I'm not 100% sure that's true. I confess that was part of the curiosity of getting this today. Aside from the fact that the hardcover is nice to have, and also it was dirt cheap. But part of the curiosity for me was wondering if that's true. I'm going to read this with that kind of fresh eye and see just how well it does work. If I'm keeping one part of my brain on whether or not it works as an introduction. In modern fantasy today, in epic fantasy today, this would be the first book, and it would be 1,200 pages long. Here, it's just one book in a series, but it is Anne McCaffrey going back to tell the beginning of the story that she invented. So I'm going to give it a try and see. And then these next two are historical fiction. And the first one is a perfect case of the Brattle will provide. Because yesterday we saw in the mail, what was it called? Dominus. The new Roma book. The new book, big Roman historical fiction by Stephen Saylor. That follows one family through all the varying changes of fortune in the Roman Empire, as a way to sort of dramatize all of the reigns of the emperors and the events of that time and whatnot. And I mentioned when I got that book that I should probably ask the publicist if maybe they could dig up the first two books from the warehouse. And I was a little hesitant about that, because the first book is called Roma, R-O-M-A, and I didn't like it. I didn't think it worked on any level at all. Not as a family drama, and also not as a very good dramatization of what was then the Julio-Claudian period. And I felt a little bit ambivalent about asking for that. Anybody to go to the bother of sending me that when I already know I kind of don't like it. And I couldn't quite remember the second book, Empire. So I was thinking, that's the one I really want to read, because it's the direct precursor to Dominus, and I don't have any negative associations with it. I was racking my brains thinking, well, can I ask the publicist for one book and not the other? Isn't that going to seem a little weird? And now I need not worry, because the Brattle provided a copy of Empire. There we go. This is I mean, I read this book, and I don't have any negative feelings towards it at all. This book covers, among many other things, the horrible reign of the Emperor Domitian, and also the people who followed Domitian, Nerva, and then Trajan, and then Hadrian, a period of Roman history that I know really, really well. And I seem to remember that it does so fairly well, fairly entertainingly. There's a large emphasis on first century mystic named Apollonius of Tyana. He doesn't have a large amount of pages that he commands in this book, but it's a standout portrait. And I'll have to see if that holds true. I'll have to see if I come up with a whole bunch of different impressions. Certainly, of all the things that I got, this is the only one that has any kind of so-called deadline, because I'm going to want to read this right before I read Dominus. So I was very happy to find it. It's a classic example. I always say, those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, I always say the Brattle will provide, because the serendipity of those outdoor cards means that you see everything. You just see everything. And a lot of times the things that you see will fill needs. They will fill things that you want that you maybe weren't thinking about. And I was very happy to see that in addition to Empire, there was also a hardcover of another Stephen Saylor book. In addition to writing these bigger historical fiction works about the history of Rome, Stephen Saylor also made his bread and butter. He made his career doing a series of ancient Roman murder mysteries, starring a man named Gordianus the Finder in Republican Rome, so Ciceronian Rome, that started out with a book called Roman Blood and just went on from there. And I have mixed reactions to Stephen Saylor. He is very, very talented. He is a very good researcher and a very good writer. But I'm not sure he's always a great novelist. And that's not to say that he's a great short story writer, because I think his short stories about Gordianus, which were collected in a book called House of the Vestals, are generally not good. Now, it's not to say that he's a good short story writer. It's to say that his books can sometimes be very impressionistic. There's, for instance, a Gordianus novel called Arms of Nemesis that has one scene in it. It's a protracted scene. It's not a moment. But there's one scene in that book that is surreal and unbelievably moving, but the rest of the book is largely forgettable. And that holds true in a lot of the Gordianus books. There'll be scenes or themes or one character. One of Gordianus's adopted sons, for instance, is just a instantly mesmerizing fictional creation. You don't want to read about anybody else when he's around. And there are novels where a thread of his runs throughout the book and does a lot. But in the Gordianus the Finder books, in my opinion, there are only a couple that actually cohere from front to back as novels. The one that does that the best, I think, the best book in the series, is a book called Murder on the Appian Way, which I think is book number 4 or 5 in the series. Isn't really necessary to read them in order, except that things change in Gordianus's life. He gets older, for instance. He ages, and also his household grows. He adopts people. They get married. They have kids. So it's not that you need to know any of that, because Saylor fills you in, but reading them in direct order from Roman Blood will give you a sense of that organically unfolding, but it isn't necessary. But Murder on the Appian Way is about a Republican Rome figure named Clodius, who is fascinating, and it's a very, very good book. And in my opinion, the other Gordianus the Finder book that really works as a book is this one that I found today in hardcover, Catalina's Riddle. Which is about a man named Catalina, Lucius Sergius Catalina, who was a lout, a thug, a firebrand, a bomb thrower, an insurrectionist in Cicero's Rome. And I say Cicero, there's Cicero right there, and that is the famous portrait, a famous painting of the Roman Curia, the Roman senators, and Cataline is alone. he's a bitter and ostracized off to the side. Uh, he is an anomalous figure in the Republic, a very complicated anomalous figure, a precursor in some ways to the chaos that would envelop Rome, the one-man firebrand chaos that would be represented by figures like Marius and Sulla, and eventually, of course, most of all, by Julius Caesar. But Gordianus has always had a sort of a touchy relationship with Cicero. In Roman Blood, the first book in the series, he gets his first case in the series from Cicero. And here, Cicero wants to involve him in the unrest that Catalina is inspiring in Republican Rome. And readers are going to have a sort of a shiver of anticipation, because they know that Cicero's dealing with the Cataline rebellion, the Cataline revolt, was a major feature in his time running the state of Rome, and has all sorts of, in my opinion, unanswered questions. Readers are already going to know that. This is a fictional exploration of that whole subject. And Stephen Saylor, here we have, let me show you. This is the Stephen Saylor of later books. A happy middle-aged man. But the further back in the Roman Blood books you go, the closer you get to Stephen Saylor as a historical fiction super hottie. And that, even this is older than the author photo for Roman Blood. But this book finds Gordianus retired from being a finder, from being essentially an amateur detective, and embittered with the whole idea of the Roman state, not a loyal Roman at all. And when he is, the Gordianus books often have the pattern where he will be comfortably at home, either in his rundown mansion in Rome in Roman Blood, or at his farm in the later books when he retires from the city of Rome completely. The pattern will usually be that he will be ensconced and relatively happy when someone comes to him with a case, with a mission. And in this case, he gives a diatribe right at the beginning of the book that I wanted to read you, because it shows we're dealing with a very changed character. The visitor says, well, surely you miss your work as a finder. And he says, I miss that least of all. Do you know what I did for a living? I called myself a finder. Advocates hired me to find proof of their enemies' crimes. Politicians, may I never see another, hired me to uncover scandal about their adversaries. I once thought that I served the truth, and through truth, justice. But truth and justice are meaningless words in Rome. They might as well be obliterated from the Latin tongue. I discover a man is guilty of some heinous crime only to see him acquitted by a bribed panel of judges. I learn that a man is innocent, then see him convicted on a spurious evidence and hounded out of the city. I discover that the scandal attached to a powerful man is true enough, but for all that he is a sound and honest man who has only made the same failings as other men. Even so, the scandal is all that anyone cares about, and he is expelled from the Senate, and the true reason is some political maneuvering by his enemies, whose true agenda I can only guess at. Meanwhile, a total scoundrel charms the mob and bribes their leaders and gets himself elected consul. I used to think that Rome was growing worse and worse, but it was I who changed. I've grown too old and weary to stomach such beastliness any longer. It sounds like a pretty firm door closed on the story, but it isn't. It doesn't end up being that way. I was very happy to find it. I don't have any Stephen Saylor here at all. Now I have one Gordianus book and one, or two if you count Dominus. Now I'll get the finished copy of Dominus, of this broader series of historical novels about Roman history. So my hope is that whoever unloaded these two books also unloaded a hardcover copy of Murder on the Appian Way. I'd very much like that. I don't think there was a hardcover copy of Roman Blood. I think that was issued as a mass market paperback when no one knew that it was going to take off, that it was going to be popular with fans. So I'd be willing to bet that if there was a hardcover, it's kind of hard to find. But that's all right, because Roman Blood, curiously enough, for the first book in the series, is not one of the better novels in the series. It has a bravura opening and a fantastic climactic scene, but the rest of it is kind of muddied. Whereas in Cataline's Riddle and Murder on the Appian Way, I think there's much more narrative control just exercised throughout. But anyway, that was my Brattle trip. for today. The only other thing I want to do, if I can do it without upending this camera, is to open one package. There's one. How you doing? How you doing, baby? I'm all right. I'm perfectly okay. You're a good girl. Yes, you are. I've got one little package that came. I'm almost done. I am. I'm almost done. It's a tiny little thing. It's thin as could be, so we'll just end up this way. So the people who don't like Brattle hauls but do like mail hauls are going to get the shaft. So what have we got here? Oh my. Oh goodness gracious. All right, this is from the great folks at Randall Jarrow. This comes out in July, but of course I'm going to read it right away. I'm not going to wait until July to do this. This is called Books Promiscuously Read, Reading as a Way of Life by Heather Cass White. Books themselves drift all over the place, and so should we in our encounters with them. So writes Heather Cass White in her remarkable book-length essay, Books Promiscuously Read, a powerful tribute to the profound joy and power of reading. If you've been finding it more and more difficult these days to commit yourself to opening a book and reading, start here for a refresh. White's passion will reignite that spark. For her, reading is nothing if it not a pleasure that is and is not an end in itself, a pleasure that is childish but also mature, a pleasure that opens the door to so much of what makes life feel meaningful. I'm on board so far. In an elegant 5-part structure, opening and closing with aphoristic propositions and conclusions, while devoting the heart of the book to the reading capacity for play, transgression, and insight, all in capital letters. This book guides the audience in how to think about the practice of reading, stopping to consider many inspired source texts along the way, a mischievous examination of sound play in Don DeLittle's Underworld, sits side by side with an appreciation of the sheer oddity in Emily Dickinson's verse. The author summons the great book-crazed characters of literary history, from Don Quixote to Frankenstein's monster to Middlemarch's Dorothea. And she elucidates how the benefits of reading come from faith in reading itself. How, quote, our reward for reading freely is the feeling that we have just slightly left both book and world behind. I don't know what this just slightly is. I leave the world completely behind. This book is a quiet, blissfully radical book about delectation, and I look forward to your coverage this July. Well, okay. I know this author's name. Heather Cass White. Who is she? I know I recognize that name. Heather Cass White has edited several collections of Marianne Moore's work. Oh, okay, all right. New and collected poems, a quiver with significance, adversity and grace. Okay, she's a professor of English at the University of Alabama, but I have read her Marianne Moore. I'm a big fan of Marianne Moore and her poetry, but also her collected nonfiction. Her collected nonfiction includes almost all of the jobbing, $50 a shot book reviews that she did 100 years ago, and they're incredible, just incredible. Though that collection of her nonfiction gets longer, the pieces get longer as it moves through time. As she becomes a more substantial literary figure, the pieces get longer. The original book reviews in that collection are when she was just reviewing anything that an editor would send her for the money, and they're amazing. They're just amazing. So all right, I know this author as an editor and an explicator, but this is just a hymn of praise to reading. And I've never read this author in that register before, so that's going to be great. And I'm going to do it this weekend. This is July book, so I don't have to worry about it for a long time. But a book like this, I'm not going to be able to resist. And it's going to go on the bookcase of books about books and reading and whatnot. And I just recently moved all those books. If you're following the little soap opera here on this channel, they were originally on a bookcase in the little book room. And I quickly realized that bookcase was terminally overcrowded. There was no way they would fit, no matter how I rearranged things. That I needed basically twice the room. So I moved all of those books to a floor-to-ceiling bookcase in this room. And they fit. Barely. barely. So I'm already running out of room on that bookcase. Already. And here's another one to add to it. And who knows what I'll find or get in the mail. But anyway, actually, the Randall Jarrow. Now that I think about it, the Randall Jarrow is all book reviews. So that's 2 in one day to go on that bookcase that doesn't have the room for it. So I'm going to have to move them again. Anyway, in the meantime, that is it for this video. I'm exhausted. So we have books promiscuously read. Reading as a Way of Life. Comes out in July. Might as well pre-order it now. You know you're going to want it. Then we have books from the Brattle. So we have Cataline's Riddle by Stephen Saylor. We have Empire, also by Stephen Saylor, the second book in a series for which I just got the third book. We have Dragon's Dawn, which is like the 9th or 10th Pern book, but it relates the first Pern story of settlers arriving on Pern and discovering both dragons and thread. And then we have Gene Everett Smith's FDR biography, a huge FDR biography. We have Kipling, Auden and Company by the great Randall Jarrow. Oh, I don't think a pyramid's going to work here. Is it, Bean? Is a pyramid going to work? No? You're not going to care anyway. You're only paying attention to the cute little dog. Oh, baby. We also have Heart's Desires, a collection of essays by Edward Hogan, and finally, the Penguin Book of Modern Verse Translation, in which, despite the title, a whole bunch of poets translate the ancients from China, from Persia, and a great deal from ancient Rome. So it's going to be a joy to dip in and out of that. I don't think I'll go from one end to the other. The 2 in this batch that are going to be read first are the little book about books and the big book about FDR, but not right now. So I'm gonna wrap this up, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.